It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
We're the Insiders. So, Scott, a big decision by the Supreme Court on the governor's veto, and we have the most expansive veto power, as you know, in the state of Wisconsin. And the governor vetoed things so that school aid will be provided for kids in K through 12 education for the next 400 years. At least a little bit of an increase. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I was fascinated by the decision, and it's clearly going to have an impact on Wisconsin politics for a long time. I was fascinated because I believe it was Justice Karofsky who said during the oral arguments, well, this is like crazy. You can't do that. And then later she writes the decision that says, oh, yes, you can. So I found that to be kind of interesting, quite a turn of events on her part. Essentially, what we've got here is we're saying that one person can make a decision on spending and property tax increases for the next 400 years, unless a supermajority of both houses of the legislature override him, or perhaps you get a recession and a governor of either party says, well, we just can't keep this up. But it really does decide almost half of the budget in the state of Wisconsin. The school aids represent 40-some% of the state budget. That's quite a lot of power to have in one person's hands. Where are the defenders of democracy now, right? But this is reminiscent to me of my time in the Thompson administration when we were working for Governor Thompson, and I used to sponsor a contest for the staff for the most clever vetoes, and we'd come up with things for like taking all the furniture from the Department of Justice and sending it over to the Department of Agriculture. And that was back when you could strike out words, create whole new sentences, even slice letters together to create words. And the public reacted to that. And over the course of the next decade, the legislature reacted to it as well. And so we saw a series of constitutional amendments to rein in the power of the governor. You can't do the Vanna White veto anymore. You can't do a bunch of these other vetoes anymore that Tommy Thompson and other governors afterwards used. I think we're going to see that here, right? I think there'll be a natural reaction that Karofsky was right the first time when she said this can't be right, that someone can make a decision that lasts 400 years like this. So let's make sure that we can rein that in the future. The idea behind the partial veto, of course, is that you can sign the item, you can veto the item in whole or in part. But of course, creative people, Democrats and Republicans, have taken that word in part and interpreted in all sorts of ways. And some of them have been deemed by the public to be out of bounds, and we've now taken them off the list, but now we've got a new one. Apparently, in part can actually allow you to get more than the whole, and you can actually increase spending with a veto and keep it going for 400 years. I just can't believe that's going to stand with the public.
Well, let's deal with a couple of things. One is, well, Scott was over there with Governor Thompson. I was on the defensive end of that, and Scott stole my thunder here. The Vanna White veto was the Tommy Thompson used that, and the reason that the Vanna White veto was not allowed anymore was because we actually put through a constitutional amendment, which the people approved. They said you can't do that. But I think what happened, let me just for a second defend Justice Karofsky. I think what she did, she said, well, this is silly. And she was being just honest. It does sound silly. And then she actually looked at the law and she said, this is a really expansive veto authority. And, the law is crystal clear on this. And she said, here it is. Okay, with those two things said, let's first of all deal with this, that this is in place now for 400 years. Well, first of all, Wisconsin has ongoing budgets. So everything we have basically is in place for 400 years. I think what people are upset about is that, well, there's an increase for 400 years. Here's the thing you always have to remember with this. And unless you're an economist or you're a numbers guy, and I'm a numbers nerd, after about 10 years, that number makes almost no difference because of the time value of money, because of inflation. What is a significant number for now and for the next few budgets will become next to meaningless, and it will be meaningless at 400 years when a home will cost, $30 million. So I think that we have to recognize that this does not have the consequence that we think. But secondly, I think what it does remind us of, and I remember this was the bane of our existence in the legislature, is that when you sent things over to Governor Thompson, he could veto it in any way he wanted until we had the Vanna White veto. But still, the numbers thing was left out there. And the problem is, as a legislator or a legislative leader, if you want to send through something to say you can't do this anymore, you have to have something that's an example of where it was egregious or it was wrong. And that's why this change in the Constitution, marginally for some particular thing that comes up, happens irregularly. Now, they may go in and change this. From my perspective as a legislative type, I would prefer to see that a governor couldn't do this. But I don't think it has the dramatic effects that people are saying, oh, there are going to be increases for 400. It'll be like a penny increase in 400 years.
Well,
So
the increase in this budget for just this item will be about $750 million. The governor also wants to increase aids for special education, and I think there's probably an appetite for that in the legislature as well. So big chunks of the budget are kind of being decided by previous actions here. That's not uncommon. In many ways, one legislature, they cannot dictate the actions of the next legislature, but they sure can sort of give a lot of momentum to a decision. So my guess is that, people will calm down at some point here and just go, yeah, we got to get rid of that one. When we said before you couldn't slice letters to create new words, now we'll probably say you can't slice digits to create new numbers. But we'll see. I do hope that the public continues to rein this in, because it is another example of of power being taken from the legislature and gone to the executive branch. We had a rash of that in the Thompson years. The public scaled it back, and I think we're seeing it again now, and I think they will scale it back as well.
I think Scott's probably right, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. However, when you're a governor or you're the legislature, you take the tools that are available to you and you use them to the best of your ability. And just as Scott noted that Governor Thompson did use these tools that were available to them, Governor Evers is doing the same thing. I think that Justice Karofsky was just surprised when she found out, wow, the law is quite explicit on that. Our Constitution is pretty. And by the way, just so people know, even after the Vanna White veto was taken away and some other things, we still have, I think, if not the most, one of the very strongest line item veto authorities in the entire country. It gives enormous power to the chief executive to do it. And here's an example of it.
So I used to give out a 6-pack of beer to the staffer with the most clever veto. I want to know who I'm supposed to send it to this time. Is it Justice Karofsky, or is it the clever staffer at the Evers administration?
I think it's the clever staffer at the Evers administration. You got to give him credit where credit's due. There we go. See you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.